17th, 2024. This is episode 64 of the Sports Daily College Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and as usual, I'm joined by Joe Meade. Koomar might be joining us later on in the program, but just going to be Joe and I as we start out and react to the NCAA tournament bracket. So, Joe, we're going to start it off pretty simple. Any big takeaways? I know we're going to get to a couple.
Yeah, Sean, I think this was the most unpredictable and shocking bracket we've had in quite some time. I think every year there's one or two teams or decisions that take everyone away, but it's nothing where it's more than one or two and it kind of dies down. This one's going to have a longer time to die down, don't you think?
Yeah, obviously the events that kind of transpired over the last day with Oregon and NC State stealing bids and Florida Atlantic losing and Dayton losing. We knew the bubble was going to shrink, but there's some teams that got left out that would be in every other year. And, you quick look at the bracket matrix, and the 200 and something bracketologists on there had a little bit of a different idea than the committee. And, teams being overseeded, teams being underseeded. I think I did fine in my projection. I still should be above average, but the average on the bracket matrix is going to be significantly lower than past years because of, the committee being very, very odd in some of their selections. So, Joe, the first takeaway that I have, Mountain West is getting a ton of disrespect. A ton of disrespect. Now, we talked over the season about how they were going to get 6 bids, and they did get 6 bids, but barely, because Colorado State was the last team in. They're going to be playing Virginia in the first 4. But, Joe, Boise State on the 10 line, Nevada on the 10 line, New Mexico as an 11, Utah State as an 8. Every team in the Mountain West, except for San Diego State, I had at least one seed line higher. So, any thoughts on the Mountain West getting a tough draw?
I still think, we're going to talk about the most snubbed conference, in my opinion, up next. But no, nothing too major. I think New Mexico, the fact that they definitely would have been in had they not won yesterday is kind of a joke. I think they probably did enough to do to be an at-large, even had they lost to San Diego State. I think, though, with all the matchups, we'll get into this a little later, they have plenty of chances to prove the committee wrong. And truthfully, Sean, I really think the Mountain West is probably going to get 2 or 3 teams in the Sweet 16. So I don't hate that overall. I think the seeding was disrespectful, but overall I think it's a net positive for them based on the matchups.
Yeah, Joe, I might have something kind of similar to what you just said in our over-under segment, which will be later on, but about Mountain West teams in the Sweet 16. Funny enough, we actually didn't talk about that before. So glad to see we're on the same page. But the committee chair was interviewed over, on CBS and ESPN after, and he seemed pretty clear that New Mexico stole a bid, which means that they would have not been in had they not won, which I think is a little harsh. In the Mountain West, Joe, they've struggled over the years in the tournament until last year. San Diego State went to the championship game. So it doesn't seem like the respect from the committee has quite arrived for the Aztecs going on that run last year. But Mountain West has, enough matchups to prove them otherwise. The other conference, Joe, that got significantly disrespected is the Big East. 3 teams in the field of 68. Now, 3 of them were very close to being in also, but this was definitely the major talking point from the selection show.
I thought that was a complete and total joke. I think the fact you had probably the best team in the bracket being UConn, and no, clearly the best team in the bracket using their logic alone. If you want to make this argument that St. John's doesn't belong in, fine. But don't tell me Michigan State belongs as a 9 seed just because they played Purdue close twice. St. John's played UConn, who's clearly the better team than Purdue based on nothing but what the committee's saying. Close 3 times. They had one more quad 1 win than Michigan State. I know they had the quad 3 loss to Michigan. But overall, Sean, the fact Providence with 6 quad 1 wins didn't get in, the fact Seton Hall didn't get in and St. John's didn't get in, that's almost kind of out of a fantasy. It's like I'm still having a hard time putting that out of my mouth. Like I thought it was an error at first, but Sean, there's no other way to put it. How could the best conference in college basketball, if not a top three conference, get only three teams in? That makes zero sense to me.
Yeah, it's not a good look. After last season wrapped up, we talked about how great of a spot the Big East was in with Cooley going to Georgetown, getting them back off the ground. Rick going to St. John's, trying to get them into the tournament, and they get three teams in. That's extremely wild. The team in Seton Hall that went 4 games over 500 in a power conference did not make it in, and St. John's and Providence looked like Seton Hall was the second team out according to the committee, but the Red Storm of St. John's and Providence were not even in the first four out, which is pretty shocking to me. That's a conference-wide level of disrespect to have those teams not just in the first four out. I thought it came down to Virginia or St. John's for my last spot, and I gave it to the Red Storm, but pretty clearly that the committee had a different idea about them. They will be rejecting their NIT invite. Rick Pitino has said that. He kind of said, while respecting the tournament, we're not going to do that because we don't believe that we should be in it. And he, said some pretty interesting comments about questioning the integrity of the committee and stuff like that. That's totally on brand for Rick Pitino. Kim English was interviewed as well, calling into the validity of analytics. We're not sure what Shaheen Holloway has to say at Seton Hall yet. But, Joe, any last thoughts on the Big East getting the short end of the stick here?
Yeah, I think if you really valued road wins all that much, you clearly would have put Seton Hall or St. John's. And Seton Hall won at Providence, won at the Garden, won at Butler. St. John's not as many road wins. However, St. John's did have that big road win at Butler. They did beat really like Villanova, who was also a bubble team going into this week. They probably were really close to being on that first four out too. So the fact that they didn't seem to reward anyone from winning games away from home, especially these three teams, I find that kind of hypocritical based on everything they had done in the past. And I'm not taking a shot at Michigan State. I think they clearly deserve to be in the tournament, but for them to be a 9 without even being close, I am of the opinion that if Tom Izzo wasn't their coach, they'd be playing in Dayton, if not being in the same position as St. John's or Seton Hall right now.
Yeah, you have to think that because we've talked about all year of how the net and the other analytics have loved Michigan State. Well, St. John's is in the 30s and Indiana State is in the 20s in these rankings. So Indiana State, by the way, is the highest ranked net team ever at 28 to be left out of the field. That has been about 6 or 7 years now since the net has come into play. But a very odd situation there that one year they seem to really lean on these rankings, and for one selection, they certainly did. And then for another selection, they seem to give it to teams that were on the higher end of that ranking. Now, Seton Hall was pretty high in the net. They were in the 60s. That was a factor of kind of getting blown out a few too many times, but they're still one of the 3 teams in the country to beat UConn. So, Joe figures something out there, we're going to get into one more takeaway. Joe, if you are there,
Yep.
give me one team that you think is, other than Michigan State, that you think is seated too high or too low.
I know I touched on New Mexico, so I don't want to be broken record. Sean, honest to God, this is a really weird one to call out, but I'm going to do it. I don't know how Iowa State is a 2 seed. I think a lot of people, the way they dismantled Houston, and I know that was one game, but everything about them screams 1 seed to me. And for them to be in the best teams region, it kind of reeks of when Michigan State this was 2019, and it ended up working for Michigan State. Michigan State had come off the Big Ten regular season title and the Big Ten tournament title, beat Michigan 3 times. Michigan was the 2 seed in the West region, and Michigan State was the 2 seed in Duke's region, who was the number 1 overall seed. Iowa State being the number 2 seed reeks of that exact same situation. Now, Michigan State, thanks to a heroic effort from Cassius Winston and the Elite 8, overcame that, but there was no way that Michigan State should have A, been a 2 seed, and B, been a 2 seed in the number 1 overall seeds region. Iowa State was snubbed in that regard. Had they been a 2 seed in any other region, I don't think I would have had much of an issue. But the fact that they're in UConn's region doesn't really reward their performance in the Big 12 tournament or throughout the season.
Yeah, Joe, Mike and I talked about them just with NC State beating North Carolina. They just probably needed one more game to really get in that conversation. Well, the committee had them as the number 8 overall seed. So again, they were not even close to that conversation. They talked about, they asked him it on CBS. They said, how much conversation was that over that last 1 seed? And he said yes, while also saying no at the same time, being like, well, North Carolina beat Tennessee head-to-head, and Arizona had a couple too many bad losses in the Pac-12. And then Iowa State wasn't really in the conversation from what I can tell. So that's definitely something to look out for. They're definitely playing good basketball right now. Joe, another team that I think is seeded very poorly, that's the Gonzaga Bulldogs, a 5 seed. They are 25-7. They should have been in the field for sure, but not a single player on the bracket matrix had them as a 5. A couple had them as a 6, but the consensus was a 7. They just had 2 quad 1 wins on the year. Now, 2 pretty good ones at Kentucky and at St. Mary's, but it's pretty evident that Gonzaga went from probably a team outside the field before they picked off that win against Kentucky to a team with a 5 seed now. They must be putting a lot of weight into their 2 good wins and Kentucky's resurgence here late. But thoughts on Gonzaga getting a 5 seed?
I think at least they remain consistent on the quad 1A wins, especially the St. Mary's one, which you did mention. I think the big part of Gonzaga, and maybe this distinguishes them from other teams, is they don't have a quad 3 or 4 loss. And you could scream about how they play an easy schedule, but
they had more opportunities to lose them.
Yeah, they went 17-0. And I think it's worth mentioning they did beat Yale at home by 15, and that was counted as a quad 3. So not all those games are against complete and totally terrible teams. Like UCLA counts as a quad 3 1 2. I know UCLA was not good this year, but I don't hate that as much, Sean. I don't like them as a 5, but I think, a gun to my head, I think they're a 6 or a 7.
Yeah, the 5, 6, and 7. And we talked about the mush kind of in the middle of the bracket all year, Joe, and that kind of extended into the 5 and the 6 with those teams pretty much losing a lot recently. And, the likes of Clemson getting run off the floor by BC in their first game. Wisconsin jumping from a 7 to a 5 with a pretty good Big Ten tournament. And then St. Mary's. It was clear that Gonzaga, their wins, their Q1 wins are given more weight because they don't have as many. So if you go 2-2 in 4 opportunities, that's probably more impressive than like a 6 and 9 in 15 opportunities. So obviously, I think all the Mountain West teams except for San Diego State are seeded too high or low. They should be lower seeds. And FAU is the other one, Joe, an 8 seed. Many people had them sneaking into the last 4 in with this last, sequence of bid stealers yesterday. But they get an 8 seed, 25-8 on the year. They came in 2nd place in the American Conference, 14-4 in that league. They did schedule very difficult in the non-conference. They did win the ESPN Events Invitational, which had Texas A&M, Iowa State, Butler. Pretty good field. They did beat Arizona on a neutral, but they've been relatively unimpressive in American play. You a little shocked that they got an 8?
I'm really shocked that they got an 8, Sean. I'm really shocked. Them and Michigan State not even being near the cut line. And again, for the record, I think both teams should be in. Even one of them avoiding Dayton would have been completely fine to me. But for them to be this safe was kind of amazing. I think it's exactly what you said. They had to reward them for playing that brutal non-conference stretch. I think in November, they probably, along with Purdue, probably had the toughest schedules in the entire nation. So that's a credit, and hopefully teams take that into account. And FAU, not taking anything away, they won a lot of those games. They beat Arizona, they beat Texas A&M, and even some of their quad 2 wins. Beating Butler, beating Virginia Tech, those counted too. So I think it's a good lesson to schedule those games, but push comes to shove, you have to win a few, and FAU did just that. You can't just have a schedule where, like maybe even a St. John's, they scheduled a lot of tough games, and they didn't win a lot of them, frankly, in the non-conference, and that's maybe one of those wins. Like had they beaten Michigan, maybe that's ultimately what did them in.
Yeah, the more so than normal, I think the committee rewarded strength, non-conference strength of schedule pretty tough. That's another reason why Iowa State's on the 2 line. They played nobody. Now, it stinks that their Big East Big 12 game was DePaul, who is 300 plus in Ken Palm, but they didn't. They were in the 350s in non-conference strength of schedule. You saw that with a lot of Big 12 teams, but it seems like only a couple of them were punished. TCU, for example, they did go to play Diamond Head, and they lost to Nevada, who's a 10 seed. But other than that, their Big East Big 12 battle game was Georgetown. They didn't schedule very hard, but they only got a 9 seed. So it seems like, again, selective choosing here by the committee on when to nick teams a seed line for scheduling and others not at all. So, Joe, we're going to leave this rant for Mike. He's not too happy about one of the teams being left out. If he doesn't get to it at the end, we'll go to it. But the last initial takeaway before we get into the regions, Joe, Virginia is in the field, and they are in Dayton. Certainly not a ratings move, that one by the committee.
Yeah, I don't know how much the Virginia fan base is going to travel to Dayton. This is probably the first time they've been in any kind of game of this magnitude. So I don't know, Sean. It's really weird. I think if I was going to be the ratings angle, I think St. John's, Michigan State, or St. John's, Virginia, and pretty much anyone but Colorado State versus Virginia would have been my angle. But that's why I'm not on this committee, clearly.
Yeah, Virginia, if anyone hasn't had the punishment of watching them yet, it's exactly that. It is not fun to watch. And Colorado State is a fun offense, with Isaiah Stevens. So that game, might be one of the less boring Virginia games, but I am shocked that Virginia made it. They lost to they seemed like one of those teams that would have been in the last 4 in before all these bid stealers and would have had their bids snatched, but they didn't. So we'll get into that region later. We're going to go to the East region first, Joe, and a lot of people, this is the number 1 overall seed. This is UConn's region. Now, for the YouTube viewers, this will be up on the screen. The Spotify viewers, you're just going to have to find a bracket yourself. UConn will start their tournament in Brooklyn. They will face the winners of their conference, Stetson. Jalen Blackman is a pretty terrific player for the Hatters there. It's their first tournament in a while. But, Joe, the 8-9 game is an extremely interesting one here in Brooklyn. We've got the previously mentioned FAU Owls going up against Boo Buie and Northwestern. So, we've got a Janelle Davis versus Boo Buie legacy type game going on here. And whoever wins that one is going to have a quick early shot at what many are deeming the top dogs here in UConn. So these games will be played on Friday in Brooklyn. And Northwestern and FAU will be the first game on Friday. It'll be on CBS at 12:15, and then UConn and Stetson scheduled for 2:45 right after that. So a pretty good slot there for the Huskies. And in this pod, it's hard to see anybody coming out of it other than the Huskies.
Yeah, I think both these games for UConn are going to be. This should be an extension of UConn. It kind of what it was at the Garden like 10 years ago. That, to me, was one of UConn's best showings at a neutral site, similar to what the Big East tournament was, frankly. I see them having no problems against either FAU or Northwestern. I think, Bowie, I do assume Northwestern's going to beat FAU. Bowie is not going to be enough. He could have 45 points. It's not going to match anything or anyone on UConn, frankly. I think Boo Buie versus Tristan Newton as best players. Tristan Newton wins that pretty easily, Sean. And I see no response down low from either team for Klingon or Johnson for UConn. So I think UConn cruises to the Sweet 16 in Brooklyn.
Yeah, the Boo Buie legacy tournament run that everybody is hoping for, it's just not coming. And this is, I don't have them beating FAU, to be honest, right now. I think FAU is very well balanced and might be able to hang with UConn. And I think they're better than Northwestern. While I do think that an 8 seed is too high for them, Northwestern's been really banged up down the stretch here, and is lucky that the season wasn't a couple weeks longer, because they maybe could have fallen out of the field. But Joe, take us through the next pod here in the East region.
Yeah, we have Auburn, who, as you know, Sean, they're the only team as of today that's top 10 in defensive and offensive efficiency, coming off the SEC tournament title. Probably one of the hottest teams in the country. And frankly, Sean, probably if they were a 4 seed in any other region, they'd be a very popular pick for the Final Four. Number 13 is Yale. Yale, if you didn't watch the Ivy League tournament, I'm sorry, you missed out on a great tourney. Barely snuck by Brown, who was 14 and 17. Needed a buzzer beater to win. I thought that defensive breakdown by Brown was an absolutely horrible way to lose. They played really good game, and to give up like a bounce pass that late, you have to make the guy make a jumper, and they just practically made a layup floater. Come on. San Diego State, Brian Dutcher. Some Michigan rumors are arising. He was the ex-assistant. We're not going to talk about that at length. But, Sean, this is really interesting because Auburn is a team that the metrics love. San Diego State they got the pedigree, kind of like FAU. You see, this is crazy, Sean. 3 of the 4 teams in the first few games we previewed were in the Final Four last year. You can't talk of a better experience than that. So, there's a lot of different angles in this. I do think ultimately Auburn's the best team. I don't see Yale pulling a crazy upset, and I don't see UAB pulling a crazy upset against San Diego State either. I think Auburn-San Diego State is probably talent and numbers for Auburn versus experience of San Diego State. So all these games are entertaining. In Spokane, Washington, think the Aztecs will have a somewhat sizable home court advantage, but nothing to the length that UConn will have in Brooklyn, New York.
Yeah, Auburn's analytical rankings, as you said, Joe, are spectacular because they basically bully teams that are not their size. Like, as soon as they do face a team that has athletes and can run up and down the floor with them, well, that's when their results get a little up and down. But they beat bad teams by a lot, and by no means are these bad teams, but Yale is very disciplined in how they play. They're very typical Ivy League champions. They've been here before. They have a pretty solid, I would say, 5 in and maybe 1 off the bench. Danny Wolf, Bez Mbang, Pulikitis, and Mahoney are really good shooters, but I think Yale maybe sticks around for a half, and then, it'd be really hard to see them not kind of wilter under the run and gun Bruce Pearl style there. And then we got San Diego State and UAB, like you said, American champion versus Final Four team last year, so that'll be pretty interesting. Next little pod, we've got BYU, the surprise team out of the Big 12, and then Duquesne, the winners of the A-10 tournament today. That tournament went sort of off the rails, just like the committee, and the Dukes come out of it. LeBron's high school coach, Keith Dambrot, is in charge there in Pittsburgh for them. BYU, sort of like Auburn, Joe, very much loved by the analytics. They took care of business in the non-con. They picked up enough good wins in the Big 12 to get a good seed. That'll be a pretty interesting one because the Dukes are playing pretty solid ball now too. But then we got Illinois coming off their Big 10 tournament championship, going up against Jordan Latham and Morehead State. Morehead played 3 Big 10 teams in the non-conference. They had a 1-point loss on the road at Indiana, and they're beaten handily by Purdue, Penn State. Actually, they may have played 4, Joe, off the top of my head. They may have played Ohio State too. So they played Alabama, lost heavy. They played Purdue, lost by a lot. All right, so they did play Ohio State, and they lost by Penn State by a lot. But they did keep it close with Indiana, and they do have a couple of bucket getters. So this pod will be in Omaha, Nebraska. A pretty interesting one here.
Yeah, Sean, I think Illinois is clearly the best team, right? Just for eye test, everything else. I don't see them getting past BYU. That's my earliest impression. I think Illinois is kind of limited in what they can do to beat you. I think Terrence Shannon and Domask are absolute superstars, but I don't think they're going to be able to. BYU is so balanced. I don't know if Illinois, with a bad shooting night, is going to be able to keep up. So I think, a semi upset I could pick it here is BYU over Illinois. I don't see Moorhead or Duquesne uh, catching either of them off guard. Although Illinois has shown had some bad first round games in the past, I don't think this would be one. So,
Yeah, we've got Duquesne and BYU. The second game tipping on Thursday, 12:40 on True TV, and then Moorhead State and Illinois scheduled for 3:10 p.m. Eastern Time, also on True TV. BYU, Joe, sort of plays like Illinois. Their five, Ali Khalifa, is a stretch big, can knock down the triple. They are sort of positionless like the Fighting Illini, so if that matchup does happen, I think that'll be pretty interesting there. So why don't you take us into the next pod, which will also be in Omaha.
yeah, Sean, I think it's kind of weird how they have these like back to back to back, but you have the Washington State Cougars, Drake with DeVries. That's probably the most intriguing 7-10 game. It wouldn't shock me if that's a game where 60% of the pickers pick Drake over Washington State. And then you got the Iowa State Cyclones and the South Dakota State Jackrabbits, who, frankly, Sean, they've been in the tournament more than they've not from recent memory. Don't know a lot about them this year. But, Sean, I think this is Iowa State's time to shine. They play in Omaha, Nebraska. I think it'll be an overwhelming amount of Cyclone fans. In each of these pods, we have a team that's going to take over the arena. I think this will by far be the Iowa State. Omaha, for those of you who don't know, is right on the border of western Iowa. So there will be probably an 80-20, 80 Cyclones and 20 like all the other fans in this arena. So, Sean, I find it really hard to believe that anyone besides Iowa State's going to come out of this. I do think Drake picks off Washington State. And as I say that, we are joined by Mr. Michael Koomar. What's up?
Mike, thanks for joining. Eh, Can't,
Mike?
can't hear you there. I
You're
think
on
you're
mute?
muted. We can
Not
see.
now?
We can see your mouth moving. Oh,
Oh,
sorry.
I got so excited.
All right.
Here,
Well,
we're going to give him a minute. But,
while
Sean,
Mike figures it out, Joe, I really like Drake in this matchup. Washington State, terrific season, but Drake is in the state of Iowa, not too far away, so we could potentially have an Iowa versus Iowa type game here in Omaha, which will be really interesting. Tucker DeVries, one of the best players in the country, he did kind of stink it up last year against Miami, so he'll be hoping to figure that out. Mike, do we have you now?
You got me?
Yes, we do.
yes, we got
All
it.
right.
Talk about Iowa State.
So we're at the bottom of the East region here. We're going through region by region.
Okay.
So we're just talking about this little pod here in Omaha, Washington State, Drake, Iowa State, and South Dakota State.
Yeah, I think Iowa State's going to end up coming out on top in this region. I do think that them playing this well this past week, it was going to be a little bit of an exception to policy, basically playing on a home floor. With that being said, still, they're really hot right now, coming off of a great weekend and a great second half against Houston. South Dakota State, though, they're known to be tricky in these 2-15 games. I still think Iowa State, I like them. And I think I caught the end of that with Sean, you liking a Drake-Iowa State matchup. And I agree. Drake is a hell of a ball club. They were able to knock out Indiana State, rather, earlier on this year in Arch Madness. So I certainly think that could be a really good game.
Yeah, so that is. I thought it's also really telling that Drake got a 10. Now that is where the first four teams are, the last couple at-larges, but
Yeah.
that shows that they may have been considered if they did fall to the Sycamores in the championship. Well, the Sycamores were pretty close too. But Mike, in our initial takeaway segment, we left one open for you. Why don't you get to it now? You're not too happy about the team that ended up one team on the wrong side of the cut line.
Yeah, the Oklahoma Sooners, they ranked 35th in the net, and they are not going to have a chance to play for an NCAA tournament championship. And they did kind of fall by the wayside coming down the stretch in the season. With that being said, they still had a hell of a season in the best conference in college basketball, playing against Sweet 16 caliber teams night in and night out. They had an incredible out-of-conference performance. They even got to the top 10 earlier in this year. And I think it's incredibly disappointing that they're not getting a shot. Well, a school like UVA that continuously looked like maybe a bottom tier NIT team at times got a bid. They had way more bad losses and fewer quality wins and a worse net ranking by a significant margin, but they get in, which really surprises me.
Yeah, we Joe and I also said that it's certainly not for the ratings putting the Cavaliers in. Now maybe still some goodwill, bleeding off
Yeah.
from their national championship a couple of years ago, but certainly an odd decision there. I told the viewers before, the last spot for me came down to Oklahoma St. John's or Virginia, with Oklahoma just on the other side of that. So it's clear that Oklahoma was close, and unfortunately, just an FAU tournament or Colorado winning their tournament yesterday away from being in the dance. Unfortunate for Porter Moser because that team was pretty good for most of the year, and probably the biggest victim of the last couple days have been Steelers. But Mike, we are going to go to the West region next. Number 1 overall seed in that region is the North Carolina Tar Heels. They're not playing Stetson. I forgot to switch that. That is my bad. They are playing the winner of the play-in game. That'll be played on Wednesday. That'll be in Charlotte, North Carolina. But the 8-9 matchup, another very intriguing one here. We've got the Mississippi State Bulldogs led by Tolu Smith and Michigan State, who Joe and I have already said are way too overseeded. The big thing from this matchup, Joe, is what Mississippi State has is Michigan State's biggest weakness. The Spartans have had, negative play at the 5 almost all year, and one of the best in the country is going to roll into town into Tolu Smith. So what do you see here for the Spartans?
This is a game that has Tyson Walker, yet another Tyson Walker legacy game written all over it. He and Jaden Akins and AJ Hogard, the guard play has to make up. And when I say make up, I don't just mean like 10 or so points. They have to make up probably for a 20 to 30 point difference at that position at center. Because if Mississippi State is smart, they will exploit that the entire game. And I don't doubt that Thomas is going to have a great game plan. He might do what he's done in the past, which is what he's had inferior big man. Go in, be really physical, foul. And he has 3 to give. He has Cooper, he has Kohler, and he has Xavier Booker. And maybe Malik Hall could fit in there from time to time, just to have a smaller lineup and maybe spread out Miss State a bit. But it's going to require I think it's going to require a 25-plus point performance from Tyson Walker. I think if they don't get that, Michigan State's going to have serious problems in this game.
Mike, early on here, who do you see coming out of this 8-9 game?
I think it's certainly going to be Mississippi State. And I do want to be clear, we know that Tom Izzo is going to have the squad ready to play. Whether they deserve to be in the 9 seed or not, they're going to be competitive in every single game they play in March. But with that being said, I think Mississippi State is clearly the better team because of Tolu Smith. I totally agree with Joe's analysis. Michigan State is going to have to really rely on the guard play, but Mississippi State has tremendous guard play as well. And Mississippi State's playing good ball coming down the stretch. They had that really convincing win against Tennessee earlier this weekend. So I think they're going to have a pretty good chance to have a competitive game against North Carolina in the round of 32.
Yeah, so that's pretty much it for that pod. Joe, why don't you take us into the next one?
Yeah, Sean. Next, we have the Alabama Crimson Tide versus College of Charleston, which, as of right now, it's kind of a popular upset pick. I don't know why, but, I'm sure we'll get into that in a second. And then we have St. Mary's at number 5 in Grand Canyon in Spokane, Washington. So for those of you who just joined or who don't remember, this will be the same region as San Diego State and then the previous one of the previous pods we did. So yeah, so that'll be the same pod as Auburn, Yale, San Diego State, UAB, same location, different pod. Sorry, it's late here in Detroit. But Sean, what are your initial thoughts on Alabama College of Charleston? Is there any potential for an upset in this game?
Certainly. Charleston's a good ball club. Pat Kelsey is an excellent coach. They keep giving him more money to stay there. He's going to be linked in your coaching search, Joe, whether he's a top candidate or maybe one of the unlikely ones. He's keep saying it, but he might not be there for very long. He'll have his team ready to play. They don't have a great league there in the Colonial, or it's not called the Colonial anymore. It's called the Coastal. They're headed to the A10 maybe as early as next year. But Alabama's sort of like Auburn, Joe. They kind of beat up on teams that are not quite as, don't have the athletes. That's why Auburn and Alabama are very similar. They have great analytical rankings, and their only solid wins are against each other. But Bama typically takes care of business against the teams that they should, and I don't think that they will be tripped up here. But Mike, any differing thoughts?
Yeah, I think look out. Carlson Charleston, this squad has a lot of experience in March. Last year, if y'all remember, they took the national runner-ups into the last second. Had only a 6-point loss to San Diego State last year in a really, really competitive game. So I think they certainly have a chance in this one. It's definitely not as good of a squad as they did last year. Alabama just seems to be playing a lot better basketball of late, and albeit they had an early exit in the tournament, but in the SEC tournament. But I think those are just going to be too much for Charleston. The game that I am really excited about, though, is the one next to them. It's going to be Grand Canyon against St. Mary's. And we know head coach of Grand Canyon, Bryce Drew, he's had some heroics in the NCAA tournament before when he played at Valparaiso. He did a game-winning buzzer beater to send his squad to the Sweet 16. And GCU is also a school that has experience in the big dance. They last year had a 12-point loss to a Gonzaga squad. That was pretty good. So they've got experience in the WCC. I actually like Grand Canyon to get the job done in this one.
Yeah, so they're certainly going to be a very, very popular upset pick. St. Mary's maybe a little bit overseeded, but they did beat Gonzaga 2 times, which share their same seed line. Moraga is not too far away from Spokane, but St. Mary's doesn't have a huge fan base, so don't think that'll be an away game by any means for Grand Canyon. But, yeah, we'll be interested to see. I think Alabama comes out of there, but their round of 32 game will be at least a little bit difficult if they get there, no matter who they're playing against. So, Mike, if you got the bracket up, why don't you take us through this next pod?
Yeah, next pod, it's going to start off with Clemson taking on New Mexico. Clemson, they've been struggling a little bit coming down the stretch. And New Mexico, obviously, they just won a very competitive Mountain West Conference tournament championship. And then also in the pod, you've got my Baylor Bears taking on the last 4 winners of the Patriot League in the Colgate Raiders. So a couple of interesting games. Joe, what do you think when you originally see this pod?
I think the first matchup is another one of these games where I think a majority of people are going to pick New Mexico, the higher seed, over Clemson, especially what you've said. Clemson's kind of reeled of recent. New Mexico, I don't think, of all the guard duos we've seen over this conference tournament weekend and the past 2 weeks, I think the play of House and Mashburn Jr., I think what they combined for like 49 or 45 plus points in the championship game.
Yeah, they're certainly they've got the capability of going on one of those crazy guard March runs, because after all, that sort of play is what wins you games in March. Clemson got pieced by Boston College by almost 20 in the ACC tournament. So I think New Mexico is early favorites in this one, to be honest. I don't think it'll be an upset if the Lobos pull off the W here.
Yeah, Clemson not only lost to Boston College, but they've lost 3 of their last 4, and that includes games at Wake Forest. They got crushed against Wake Forest. They also lost to Notre Dame. Understood Notre Dame's a lot better team coming down the stretch than they are, but that's still a team that only won 14 games all year.
Yeah, this game will be Friday at 3:10 p.m. Eastern Time on True TV, and the Lobos are 2.5-point favorites early on. So,
Wow.
without the distinct, home court advantage, Clemson pretty close to Memphis, but not super close. The Lobos are favored to win this game, which sometimes you see in the 10-7, but rarely in the 11-6. So, anything else to add from this pod, guys, before we get to the last one of the West region?
Other than, I think, watch out for Colgate and against Baylor. One thing that Baylor really struggles with is defense against the 3, and Colgate can shoot the ball really well. We saw that when they took on Lehigh and destroyed them in the Patriot League Finals earlier this week. So I think look out, Colgate. I'm picking the Bears. I like the Bears to go to the Sweet 16, but I think Colgate will give them a run for their money.
Yeah, Colgate, Mike, has come pretty close a couple years in a row now.
A couple times.
They had a 14-point lead against Arkansas a couple years ago. And it just seems like if they keep putting themselves in chances like this, where one day they might hit 60% of their threes and be right there in it at the end. But, Baylor this game will be after actually, no, it'll be before. This will be game 2 on Friday.
12:40.
12:40
Yeah.
True TV. Baylor 13.5-point favorites so far from Memphis, Tennessee. So, Joe, why don't you take it away with this last pod here in the West region?
Yeah, Sean. And speaking of the West, we got another Mountain West team, the Nevada Wolfpack. Another team that could have been underseeded or disrespected that we talked about a little earlier on the show. Play the Dayton Flyers, 7-seed Dayton. I think that was another interesting selection. We don't have time to analyze each and every single one, but just wanted to put it out there. And then the Arizona Wildcats versus the Long Beach State. And Long Beach State, this is the weirdest thing. I think their nickname is the Beach, Sean. Like when Michigan got pieced by them this year, they wouldn't say, "Oh, basket by Long Beach State's player number whatever." They would say basket by the Beach, and beach rhymes with another word in the language, and I'm not going to say what it is, but that's what it kind of sounded like if you have the wrong accent. So I think that's very funny, but I think Arizona Long Beach State's a very intriguing game. I saw Long Beach State play USC, and I saw them in person against my Wolverines. Clearly, 2 sub-500 teams.
They beat them both.
Long Beach State can make shots, man. And this is a team that's not afraid to go late into the shot clock and chuck up an uncomfortable shot. They make a lot of them. The fact they fired their coach, and I think a lot of America is cheering for him to kind of stick it to the administration. So I think that's an interesting storyline. But guys, take it away.
Yeah, I'll get into it real quick, Mike. He agreed to coach the team throughout the rest of the year, and they kept winning. They were 4 seed. They didn't have a horrible season out there in the Big West, and they're in the tournament. And they asked him after the game, and he was sort of on the let's stick it to him side. He's like, well, it was their decision, and I'm just glad to be coaching these guys. And good for them. I think it will be tough. It's not too far away from Cali, so maybe they can get some fans there. But, Mike, the other matchup is very interesting because Nevada is a very solid team, and Utah is significantly closer than it is to Dayton, Ohio.
Yeah, I really would have thought that when we were going through the seats that maybe you would flip and make Nevada the 7 and Dayton the 10. That seemed to make a lot more sense for me. But look, I think Nevada is definitely going to end up being the favorite, at least by the Vegas money line. They're just playing a tremendous game. This is going to be a lot more of a home game for them than it will be for Dayton. And I really like Nevada in this one. Real quick, Long Beach State's mascot, it's LB the Beach.
Okay.
LB the Beach. ELBE. But anyways, I do think, talking about the West as a whole, I think the West is the weakest out of the 4. And I think Arizona could certainly take advantage of that. They've got elite guard play. They've got a lot of experience in March on this team. So maybe learning from their loss last year to Princeton and leaning on that to get them further on this year.
Yeah, they were in the same exact spot last year. They were a 2 seed, and that Princeton team ended up being pretty good. They ended up going to the Sweet 16, and their point guard, Ryan Langborg, has done a fairly good job at Northwestern this year. But they will want to get this thing right because Tommy Lloyd has had all the success in the world, really, that you could ask for there at Arizona, but no March success yet. Good opportunity to do it here, though, fairly close to Arizona. And then the West region being in Los Angeles, too. Say a Sweet 16 game against really whoever, there'll be more fans there than the other team will. This game, the Arizona Long Beach State game, will be 2 o'clock Eastern on Thursday. TBS, Arizona's 20-point favorites at this point, and then Nevada Dayton will be following that game at 4:30 on TBS, and the Wolfpack, an early favorite so far by 1.5. So any last takeaways, guys, before we get to our third region?
Yeah, I'll just have 2 comments to make. One, the name who escaped me, I just had to find it. Marcus Tenosis was at Washington and VCU for this is his second year at Long Beach State. That's the guy who will bail them out of a lot of bad positions that game against Arizona if they're going to keep it close or win. Absolute bucket getter. There's no other than that because down deep in the shot clock, he throws some absolute prayers up and they seem to go in. And, Tommy Lloyd kind of had the career trajectory of Mark Few in the sense that great regular season, really good team overall, hasn't quite had the March success, sorry. And I think all of America wants to see Caleb Love play UNC in the Elite Eight, but that's for a different pod.
Yeah, they for the YouTube listeners or viewers, we've got Armando Bacot as the top picture and Caleb Love as the bottom picture. The committee knows what they are doing with these sorts of things. Now, they love to put these storylines together, and oftentimes, teams don't even make it to the point that where one of the teams will end up messing it up. But that would be really interesting to see Caleb Love duke it out with his old teammates who are having quite the year out there in Chapel Hill. So, Mike, any last thoughts on the West region?
I think it is a pretty open region. I think any of the top 3 teams certainly all have a really good chance. Even the top 4 have a really good chance of getting to the Final Four. I do think that UNC is very vulnerable this year, and we saw that in the championship game against NC State, how they can be beat. So I think that this could be the most open out of all the 4 regions.
So we are halfway through. Just want to remind everyone that we're doing an ESPN Tournament Challenge group this year on the ESPN Tournament Challenge app. I put the link in the chat of this video if you're watching it live. I know we have a bunch of live viewers right now, and we'll get to your questions at the end. But join that. There will be a grand prize of a Sports Daily Media Network T-shirt. So us 3 will be in it. 1 entry per person, and we'll see who comes up on top. But we had a bunch of people in it last year. It was a lot of fun, and we're hoping to do the same this year. I'll put the link in the description when we're all done, and then I'll put it up again in the comments. So be sure to put one of your ESPN Tournament Challenge brackets into our group. So the third region that we're going to go to, guys, is the Midwest region. Hold on. Yes, we'll be going to the Midwest region third, and it's where the Purdue Boilermakers and Zach Edey stand. There in this first pod, they will play the winner of Montana State and Grambling State in the play-in out there in Gainbridge Fieldhouse in Indianapolis. Guys, we've talked about this for more than a year now. This is the moment that Purdue has been waiting for since they got bounced by Fairleigh Dickinson last year in this same exact game. So, Joe, what are you looking for from Purdue here to get over the hump and to get to the Sweet 16?
If you wrote a perfect script for Purdue in terms of location, this has to be it. You're in Indianapolis, Indiana. That's the place where you lost. Was it at Mackey? Where they lost to North Texas? It was either at Mackey or at Indianapolis, one of the two.
At Lucas Oil, I think.
Yep, right on the spot. That's where I think your tournament demons started. In 2019, they had that prayer against Virginia, losing the Elite Eight. I know that the way they lost was terrible. No shame in that. 2021, losing to North Texas. 2022 to St. Peter's. 2023 to Fairleigh Dickinson. There's no tangible excuse for any Purdue fan out there for them to not go to the Sweet 16 out of Indianapolis. I'm going to let Mike and Sean talk about Utah State and TCU, but the fact that you have Indianapolis, Indiana, and then Detroit, Michigan, which is a short drive away from West Lafayette. There's plenty of Purdue fans in the state of Michigan. In terms of location, you can't get any better than that. But Sean, Mike, talk some hoops with Utah State and TCU.
Yes.
I'm done with my rant.
So, Mike, I'll take Utah State, and then you could take the Horned Frogs. Utah State is one of the teams in the Midwest, in the Mountain West that Joe and I talked about that were very disrespected. I had them as high as a 6 seed. I think they for sure should have been at least a 7. They're going to have that. They're going to have a little bit of a chip on their shoulder that they should have been seated higher. There's great Osobor. His name is great. He is a really good big man that, if it comes to it and he gets to face Zach Edey, I think that could be very interesting. But they've got a pretty tough matchup here in the round of 64 against the TCU Horned Frogs, Mike.
Yeah, and TCU's got a really experienced team. You got to look at it. Emmanuel Miller, Chuck O'Bannon, Erdus Uday. That's a lot of experience, specifically in a TCU Horned Frog, ugly purple uniform. With that being said, TCU has certainly, it feels like they've hit a wall coming down the stretch. Yeah, they had a tight win against Central Florida and a win against West Virginia. But prior to the Big 12 tournament, where they kind of got embarrassed against Houston, they weren't playing very good basketball. So I do really like Jimmy Dixon's squad, but I think Utah State is going to get the win here and keep the tournament hopes alive for Utah State to potentially steal one against Purdue.
So, Joe, why don't you take us through what is going to be a pretty interesting pod?
Ooh, Salt Lake City, Utah, Kansas, who we don't know what their health status is. I think Dickinson is projected to be back, but beyond that, I don't really know more than anyone else in the country. Playing Samford, the 13th seed. Don't know too much about them, admittedly. Then, in terms of Blue Bloods, you have a potential beautiful round of 32 matchup. Gonzaga, who plays McNeese State, who went 29-3, I believe, Sean.
I think they got to 30, Joe, with a conference tournament win.
30-3. McNeese State, Will Wade. Say what you want about what he did at LSU, all the bag, all the strong-ass offer stuff, but McNeese State is one of the quickest turnarounds in college basketball history. A lot of the teams they played, especially even a terrible Michigan team, they blew out of the water. Has all the makings of a team where, I'll put it this way, Gonzaga is a lot more upset they're playing McNeese State than McNeese State is about playing Gonzaga.
Yeah, Mike, I at least think that both these teams should be on high alert for an upset.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about the 12 and 13 seeds, and they're a general theme of a lot of potential upsets this year. But I don't think you have a bigger potential or risk for a 12-13 matchup in the round of 32 as you do right here. McNeese State, look, Will Wade, when he returned back from suspension, which I believe was a 10-game suspension, he lost one game the rest of the season. That's how good this McNeese State team is, and that includes over Michigan. They beat Virginia Commonwealth as well. That's a really good team. And Kansas, which Kansas team's going to show up, right? We don't know. They got blown out of the water by a Cincinnati team that wasn't even the next four out in the Big 12 tournament in front of pretty much a home crowd in Kansas City, about 40 minutes from Lawrence. So who knows? I really do think, depending if McCullers plays or not, I think if McCullers can give 35 minutes to Kansas, they're going to get the job done. If not, I think we're going to see McNeese State versus Samford in the round of 32.
Yeah, all signs are pointing to McCullough playing. It's just a bone bruise on his knee, and they've tried to manage it and rest it, and they've kind of put him in bubble wrap and then rolled him out there and see what he's got. So
Yeah,
I think he'll play, but who knows how effective he'll be. And when it comes to McNeese State, Shahada Wells is their go-to guy. If you recognize that name, that's because he was a TCU Horned Frog last year, and he's a good player. And Will Wade just signed a big extension with McNeese State with a very low buyout, of course. But he's not going to be there for very long. And if I was Gonzaga, I would be happy that you got up to a 5, but there's a really good chance that McNeese is a better team than definitely the 7, 8, or 9 seeds. And they'll be ready. And then Samford, too. They play a very interesting style, it's commonly referred to as buckyball. They trap and blitz, and they do a whole lot of stuff that you don't see very much, which is very, you give Bill Self 4 days to prepare. You think Kansas could figure it out, but it's definitely one of the tougher scouts that Bill Self has probably ever had to do in his time at Kansas, and he's been there for a while and had a lot of good teams roll through that door. So I like the 12-13 winning here too, Mike. I like both Kansas and Gonzaga, but so Samford and McNeese State too. So, Joe, you took us through this pod, so Mike, why don't you take the next one?
Yeah, absolutely. So first one on here is going to be South Carolina versus Oregon. Oregon is a team that finally got healthy in March. And when they got healthy in March, they took down the competition in the Pac-12 championship, which included a win over Arizona. So this is a really good Oregon team. On the flip side, they're playing South Carolina. South Carolina's been very suspect in the last month of basketball. They had a 40-point loss to Auburn in early February, mid-February. And we thought that may have been a fluke, but then they lost by 31 to them in the SEC tournament. So a team that we know the kind of style of basketball that they can't play well against. I like Oregon to win this one. I think that this is going to be Not a difficult game. I really like Oregon a lot. And then on the flip side of that one, we've got Creighton versus Akron. I don't know if anybody caught the end of that MAC championship game where Akron was given the gift of being fouled down by 1 with about 3 seconds to go, an intentional foul to try to stop the clock. But they end up knocking down those 2 free throws. They get into the tournament, and they play a red-hot Creighton team. Somebody that's been playing really well. Kalkbrenner's playing the best basketball of his career at Creighton. So I like the Jays in that game. I like the Jays to go to the Sweet 16.
Joe, we've got former Big Ten coach John Gross in here with the Zips.
Yeah,
you giving
former
Akron?
Illini.
You giving Akron any shot here?
Sean, when I was 11 years old, I'll never forget, Michigan had just won the Big Ten regular season title, the first any semblance of success they had. They were a 4 seed in 2012. They played the number 13 seed, Ohio Bobcats. The Ohio Bobcats dismantled Michigan. They were led none other by John Gross. Yep.
Yeah.
And I know, he gets a lot of criticism, kind of like Richard Pitino did for his Minnesota tenure, but John Gross, Illinois, was not a failure by my estimation. I know Brad Underwood's made that program somewhat nationally relevant, and John Gross couldn't do that. He's a heck of a mid-major coach. I don't want to hear anyone else say anything otherwise. Some of the guys he's recruited, his eye for talent is amazing. With all that said, I think beating Creighton's going to be a very tall task, but if you had to put a gun to my head to pick a 14-3 upset, this might be it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's certainly the one that I have my eyes on too. That's no disrespect to Creighton. I think, they're likely to win this game still, but Akron at least will, every team will believe that they have a shot to walk on the floor and beat whoever they're playing, but this one seems the most realistic to me. Other matchup, we talked about South Carolina all year, Mike, how impressive they've been. We've also talked about how some teams who play a lot of games in a couple days tend to flame out by the time the round of 64 rolls around. Any chance that happens to the Ducks?
I think it could happen to the Ducks, but you've also not seen the Ducks be this healthy all year. And they're finally getting all of their star players into the lineup and incorporated into this team. And I think that's what's going to make them have a special weekend and get a win over South Carolina.
Yeah, this game is Thursday rather than Friday, which is tough for Oregon. Every day counts, especially when it comes to recovery. Oregon, South Carolina will be at 4 o'clock on TNT. The Gamecocks slight favorites at 1.5 so far. And the Akron and Creighton game will be 1:30 on TNT. Creighton just 12.5-point favorites so far. So an interesting one there. At least, Vegas thinks that this game might have a shot of being close. So I'll take us through the last pod here. We've got Texas as the 7 seed, and we've got the previously mentioned Virginia Cavaliers playing Colorado State in the play-in. Very odd that the 10 seeds have play-ins, but it's just how the at-large versus automatic bids worked out. That game will be played in Dayton, and then the next round will be played. The winner will play Texas in Charlotte. Texas has had a really underwhelming season, Mike, by all accounts. They were picked by many to be in the top 3 in the Big 12. They did not meet those expectations, but here they are in the NCAA tournament. Yeah,
and I would say this Texas team has a lot of experience in the tournament. You look at guys that were returning like not Max Asmus, Dylan Dessou, who was a hero last year against Penn State. And then you've got guys like Max Asmus, who took Oral Roberts to the Sweet 16. This Texas team has a lot of experience in March, and I'm going to like them to get the job done when they play who I believe will be Colorado State, a really, really competitive team. I'm sure you guys have already talked about this game a lot, but I don't think UVA is going to be up for the task in either game.
Yeah, I want to see Isaiah Stevens versus Max Asmus game, and obviously there are other players on both teams who are very important, but that's what should happen here. If Virginia gets to play Texas, I'd just be really disappointed. In the other matchup, Joe, we've got many people's pick for second place and National Player of the Year. Tennessee and Dalton Connect facing the MAC champion St. Peter's, who, took down my Fairfield Stags yesterday in a devastating loss for the Stags. But here they are, new coach for St. Peter's, Bashir Mason. This team plays a lot of defense. They're ranked very high in defense efficiency, and they're scoring the ball recently, which is why they've won the MAC tournament. Any reason that Tennessee should be worried?
I don't think there's a lot of reason they should be worried, other than the fact that it's Rick Barnes, and I'm not taking a shot there. I just mean he's gonna know what this game is like. There's no question. Um, I would hope Tennessee shows the film of St. Peter's beating Purdue and St. Peter's beating Kentucky. I don't think they'll have to be made aware of that. Outside of that, Sean, Tennessee, there's no reason they should lose this game. If they shoot, I don't even know, high 30% in this game, I don't see this game being very competitive. I think where they could get into trouble is if they fall down early. You know, I've seen them fall down early in plenty of games this year, and they've kind of folded from there. That's a hot start, fast start in this game is going to be their best friend. If they do not do that, I think this game could get interesting. But I do think Tennessee is ultimately going to win.
I think, St. Peter's should be good enough defensively to at least, make Tennessee think a little bit. And maybe, maybe they start off bad and end bad, but Tennessee should get through here. And Mike, a potential round of 32 game in what many people are calling the Rick Barnes Invitational. His former team playing his current team.
It's his old UT versus his exes that are in Texas. Look, Rick Barnes had a lot of great years, 17 great seasons in Austin. He came to UT in Tennessee, and he totally resurrected the program here. The only criticism that we've had for Rick Barnes really is their lack of ability to close out games in the tournament. He's been to a pair of Sweet 16s, but other than that, Tennessee has performed well under expectations in the NCAA tournament. We'll see what happens this year. I think they're going to get a good opportunity to knock off St. Peter's. And look, this is a completely different St. Peter's team than the one that we saw 2 years ago. I don't even know if there's a single player.
There is not a single player who's the same.
Exactly. And so, yeah, I mean, I get it. We're hearing people talk about how it's the same old Peacocks. It's not. Different coach, different team. I like Tennessee to get the job done and set up a really, really fun matchup between Rick Barnes and his former team.
So that is the Midwest region, guys. I think that's all the headlines from there. Anything else before we get to the South?
No.
All right. Last region here as we eclipse the hour mark. We got Houston, the number 1 seed in the South region. They will face Longwood in the round of 64 at the FedEx Forum. No. Yes, that's the FedEx Forum in Memphis, Tennessee.
Yep.
And Nebraska will be duking it out with Texas A&M. Interesting that the Aggies get the 9 seed here. Keisei Tominaga potentially against Houston, Joe, in the round of 32?
I think so, yeah. I'm going to go with Fred Hoiberg. I really like Nebraska. I think they have so much shot-making ability that Texas A&M could get – there is potential for a blowout here. I'm not kidding. We've been on our Big Ten podcast, Mike, if you've listened to it, or some of our national listeners. We've fallen in love with Fred Hoiberg over the past 2 seasons. Really, probably since February. He's my national coach of the year, since last February especially.
Yeah.
So – with all that said, I don't see them getting past Houston, unfortunately. I think it would take a heroic performance from not only Tominaga, but probably some guys off their bench too. So, Sean, I actually do think Nebraska, besides Purdue, is the Big Ten's best chance at the Sweet 16, which is kind of scary to say right now. But yeah, I think Houston is a buzzsaw, and they're not going to have too much trouble in either of these games.
Mike, we've got Tyrese Radford and Wade Taylor from Texas A&M who have been pretty awesome players most of the time this year, but other times they've really shot their teams out of the game. The Aggies do get a lot of offensive rebounds, but is this game as simple as can the guards for Texas A&M get the job done?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, right, it's like a lot of other SEC teams. A&M, they can score the ball in bunches, and we saw that a lot in the SEC tournament. They really struggle against defense. I think Tominaga is going to pick this A&M team apart. I think it needs to be said, I do not think A&M deserved a 9 seed. Not even close. So I think they kind of fell into this game. I think Nebraska is a really good team. And one thing that I know you guys love talking about Fred Hoiberg. something I saw him say about last week, that this was his favorite team that he has ever coached in college basketball because of the culture and their players' abilities to put the team first is what he referenced. But this is a hell of a Nebraska team. They haven't been to the Big Dance in quite some time. So with all that being said, I think, like what Joe said, I think Nebraska wins this game by double digits.
I would really like to see Fred Hoiberg and his team take on Houston and see if he can scheme his way around that defense, because he has done a lot of good things offensively this year. He's had to. He's kind of said it, but his teams in the past have just not been that talented. So he had to play really slow and bring the ball down to the end of the shot clock and win, in the 50s and 60s. But this year, he's kind of letting them rock a little bit on offense. He's doing a lot of different things from game to game. So I really would like to see how he handles the blitz from Houston and see if Tominaga and Lawrence and Gray and those sorts of guys can deal with a defense that elite. But that should be a good one from Memphis, Tennessee. So, Mike, why don't you take us through what should be an interesting 4-5, 12-13 pod here?
Yeah, I think this is another interesting 4-5, 12-13 pod that we could, I'm not saying we will, but we could see a 12-13 here in the round of 32. Look, Wisconsin had a hell of a week in the Big Ten tournament. They've knocked off Purdue in overtime before losing to my Fighting Illini here coming down the stretch. They played a hell of a game. Just Terry Shannon in Illinois just played a little bit better of a game. The issue for Wisconsin is, are they going to be rested enough to take on a really fast-paced and competitive James Madison team? We saw them obviously take care of business against Michigan State at the Breslin Center earlier this year. So all eyes are going to be on one of the few teams that's going to go into March with 30 wins. I think it's going to be a really good game.
Yeah, we've got a James Madison team who, they obviously started the season in pretty epic fashion, beating fellow Big Ten team Michigan State. And we've got Vermont, who, while they do have different players every year, they've won the America East more times than I can count in our lifetimes. They've got, a bunch of good shooters. Their 5-out offense, potentially could give Duke some problems. Duke won't be overly physical with you. So I think the finesse of the Vermont offense could be the difference. They got TJ Long, who could shoot the ball really well. Joe, you giving the Catamounts a shot here?
I give them as much as a shot as I gave Lehigh in 2012. So, some chance, but doubt it. But hey, you never know. I know, Mercer's also in there, but it's going to take a lot of, probably above 50% from three, Sean, to even be close to Duke, right?
I mean, Duke won't shove it down your throats with physicality, so I think maybe Vermont could hit enough shots to hang around and pick this off late.
I think they absolutely could. Vermont's also a red-hot basketball team. I think they only lost one game in the regular season conference. We're seeing Duke kind of hitting a wall. They've not been playing good basketball coming down the stretch. I think Duke is a pretty weak team. They're not physical, like Sean said. I think Vermont does have a chance in this game.
I think they are pretty similar teams when Filipowski's at the 5. And obviously Duke's more talented, but when that sort of happens, like Vermont will be going against an offense that is not too dissimilar from their own. And I think, if you practice against something like it every day, I think I would put Duke on high alert for an upset. But Joe, in the other matchup, Wisconsin has played themselves up to the 5 line with an appearance in the Big Ten championship game, and their reward is to face the Dukes from James Madison. Looking back on it, Wisconsin probably wishes they were a 6 seed.
Yeah, Sean, the famous John Beeline quote is, the conference tournament, you either want to win it all or lose your first game. And in Wisconsin's case, they definitely probably would have rather lost their first game. This is a game that, to me, the bench, and I think this was the key to Wisconsin's resurgence at the beginning of the year, was their bench. It was John Blackwell. It was, Carter Gilmore's come on a little of late. They're going to need a lot from their starters. So, Chucky Hepburn's probably going to have to put up 12 plus. AJ Storr's going to have to continue to be awesome, because that's exactly what he's been this past week. The bench is going to have a big impact on this game. James Madison's going to tire them out. I think they could even get in some foul trouble, Wisconsin. If Wisconsin doesn't play their game in this, and their bench does not contribute, where they, at times this year, the benches contribute absolutely nothing, which is what we saw in Wisconsin last year. I think the Dukes could definitely pick them off.
Yeah, we've got Houston. We've got both these games being on Friday, along with Houston 9:20 p.m. Eastern time on Friday on TNT, and Nebraska and Texas A&M just before that 6:50 on TNT, and then essentially at the same time Duke and Vermont will tip from the Barclays Center on CBS, and then James Madison and Wisconsin will be after that on CBS. So there's a reason why these games were picked for that third session on Friday, which is where the most viewers come in. And anything else, I could see any one of these four teams getting out of this pod, which typically happens in the 4-5, but I truly think all four of these teams could win 2 games.
Yeah, I agree.
So we'll go to who took the last pod?
I did.
All right, so Joe, why don't you take this next one here that'll be played in Pittsburgh?
We've got the Red Raiders of Texas Tech. I definitely did whatever their thing is wrong there, but whatever. Playing NC State, the NC State Wolfpack. Probably in terms of non-mid-majors, the sweetheart of the country. Am I right?
They're fun to watch.
Yeah. First team in a non-COVID year to win 5 games in 5 days, especially in a conference where no one gave them much of a shot. And then the other game, you have the Kentucky Wildcats faces the Oakland Grizzlies. So the second team who got in the state of Michigan. Actually, Oakland County is right next to Washington County, where Michigan is. Wasn't Michigan getting it? It was the Oakland Grizzlies, the winners of the Horizon League. I saw the Grizzlies play in person once this year. Very good team. Very spread out. Very well coached, too. Their coach has been there forever. In Pittsburgh, so wouldn't shock me if you see a fair number of Grizzly fans make the trip. I heard they're going to have a bus based on some intel from some people in the area. But, Sean, is there any chance that Oakland or NC State continues their magical runs?
Well, certainly for NC State, they didn't show one bit of tiredness in their games against Duke or North Carolina in the ACC tournament. And there was a pretty interesting stat, in their 5 wins in the ACC tournament, all 5 of them have won national championships in this century. That'd be Louisville, Syracuse, Duke, Virginia, and North Carolina. And Kevin Keats has stayed in his job. We'll get to another episode before these games happen, what the long-term ramifications of that are. He gets an automatic contract extension of 2 years for winning the ACC tournament, which he was good as gone before this tournament started, and now he's going to get to coach 2 more years at the minimum. DJ Burns is really fun to watch. Nobody in the ACC tournament knew what to do with him. He can back down any single defender that anybody can throw at him, and then he's a really good passer at 7 assists in the ACC championship game. So Grant McCasland has got his hands full on how they're going to scheme against that defensively. But Joe, Oakland has had a very, very interesting season, and this is again a 14 seed that probably, I would give Akron a little bit more of a shot, but Oakland scheduled very tough. They lost by 6 at Ohio State. They lost by 11 at Illinois. They beat Xavier on the road. They lost a close one to Drake, and then really they're only, they played a bunch of tournament teams and only lost one of them handily. They're winning in the second half in a bunch of them. So I think the Grizzlies could at least scare the Wildcats, and this game could be in doubt at some point in the second half. But Mike, Wildcats have been rolling until they kind of got embarrassed by Texas A&M in the SEC tournament. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, if you've been listening to our show this whole year, I'm not crazy about Kentucky. Kentucky is either really, really bad or really, really good. It just depends on the day, it really seems. So I think Kentucky is going to end up getting the job done against Oakland. And to be clear, I think this game is going to be a very competitive basketball game, especially with how well Oakland's been playing of late. I just worry when Kentucky has to play somebody on their level if they're going to show up or not. And I think they're going to meet their maker in the second round. Look, NC State's had a fantastic year, or not a fantastic year until the tournament, really, and really showed up. But Texas Tech, I think they've showed a lot of consistency this year. And even though they got bounced pretty handily in the Big 12 tournament to a really good Houston squad, they're playing a lot of really good, consistent basketball. They won their previous 4 games. One of them was a pretty handle win against Baylor. The other one against a surging Brigham Young team who you all talked about earlier, but I think they've got a Sweet 16. bid written all over them. So I like Texas Tech, honestly, to make it out of this region. But with that being said, I think there is certainly room for all 4 teams in the Sweet 16.
Yeah, we've got NC State also. These games will be on Thursday, so it's that same sort of thing. NC State had to play from Tuesday to Saturday this week, and they only get, 4 full days of rest plus travel and all that before they have to suit up against Texas Tech, who just had to play twice. So potentially something to look out for there. As I don't want to see the Wolfpack run come to an end, and I would really like to see them go up against Kentucky because I don't think John Calipari would have the slightest clue on what to do with DJ Burns other than just to score more points than him. But would like to see that. Would like to see that matchup. Obviously, Texas Tech, really good basketball team too. If they happen to beat NC State, it'll still be a good one against Kentucky or Oakland. But we've got our last region here. This will be the other one in Indianapolis, opposite the Purdue. You got Florida as the 7th seed, a tough loss today in the SEC championship. Looks like Micah Hangloten broke his ankle. That was a tough injury to watch there. Florida's still pretty good, though. They'll play the winner of Colorado and Boise State in the play-in. Mike, were you shocked at all to see these guys in the play-in game?
I mean, are you kidding me with Boise State in the play-in game? Come on. This is a team that I would have thought would have been closer to an 8 line than being one of the last teams into the tournament. This is a general theme that I know you guys talked about earlier, that the Mountain West was insulted by the committee this year. Even though they got 6 teams in, they really did not get a good seeding at all. So I really do want to see Boise State show up and get to play Florida and get a good chance to beat the Gators, who just finished up a great run in the SEC tournament. But with that being said, does fatigue set in for the Gators, who had to get all the way into the championship game and then losing one of their top players during that?
Joe, we talked about how much improved we thought the Gators have been since the beginning of the year. And with Marquette potentially without Tyler Kolek, you giving the Gators any shot to get to the Sweet 16?
Yeah, I think today was a matter of fatigue and Auburn just being a more complete and better basketball team than Florida. I don't think anyone who's listening either now or later on is going to disagree with that. It's also the Marquette thing. I think that without Tyler Kolek, I know they played pretty well against UConn. I don't know how much longer that's sustainable.
Yeah, so they will face Western Kentucky, the winners out of the Conference USA, first-year head coach for the Hilltoppers there, so congratulations to them. But Marquette has at least played okay without Kolek. They still did make it to the Big East Championship, and they did compete fairly well in their 2 losses without him in regular season. So I think they'll still take care of the Hilltoppers, but Florida comes across the line and gets to face Golden Eagles. The Gators have the guys to at least scare Marquette, don't you think, Mike?
I certainly do. I think, look, at the end of the day, Marquette's going to get the job done. But Western Kentucky does have a lot of fast-paced offense to them that they can compete. I do think Marquette is going to end up getting to the Sweet 16 here. Florida, like you guys said, very much improved team. But with Kolek or not, Marquette is still a really solid team.
Yeah, so that is it for our region-by-region breakdown. Hopefully that's enough intel for everyone to go fill out their brackets, and be sure to do that on our ESPN Tournament Challenge group. We've got a couple more things that we're going to get to today that won't take nearly as much time. But, guys, I want to each ask you for one team seeded 1 through 5 who you think can be on upset alert. And, you don't have to go into it too much because we've covered all of the games pretty much, but any seeds 12 through 16, Mike, why don't we go to you first? Who's the team that you think can get the job done and pull off the upset?
I think that top team for me is probably going to be McNeese State as the 12th seed. And I think right next to it's going to be Sanford, the 13 line, because we just don't know which kind of Kansas team's going to show up. They've been so inconsistent. And also with Gonzaga, McNeese has been so explosive this year. So I'm going to go with those 2 squads. If I had to pick one between the 2, I'm going to pick McNeese.
Joe, what about you?
I'm going to go with Akron. I think if they limit Kalkbrenner and Creighton has a bad shooting night, I think Creighton doesn't seem like a team that loves playing from behind, especially because the crowd will take over. I think whoever's neutral at that game will be cheering for Akron. No one likes seeing an underdog get their head bashed in. So I'm going to give John Gross a chance. And frankly, Sean, in terms of John Gross's career, he is a bit on the older side. Just Googling this now, see how old he's gotten. It's kind of crazy that he was promoted to Illinois coach like 12 years ago, and that kind of seems to me like it was yesterday.
Yeah, 2012. Yeah.
Yeah, John.
Isn't-
It doesn't say how old he is. What the heck? Sorry. But in terms of his career, this is probably like his chance to reintroduce himself. I think a lot of people know him as the failed Illinois coach, and I think that's more than unfair. So I do think this could be his chance to reintroduce himself to the country.
Yeah. I'm going to go with Grand Canyon. I think that they are going to beat St. Mary's. Tyon Grant Foster is a NBA level type player, and I think if he has maybe a run to the Sweet 16 or Elite 8 or something, I think he might go down as one of the legends of this tournament that we'll remember when we're talking about, the 2027 tournament in a couple years. We'll always remember, we always remember what St. Peter's did. I think Grand Canyon can be one of those type of teams. They're fun to watch. Like Mike said, Bryce Drew, obviously a terrific coach, but they're my team that I think can get the job done. Now, guys, so we've got 6 over-unders for us here. A couple of them are repeats from the year before, and we've got a couple of new ones too. So the first one, which will be the third time that we're doing this, the over has hit pretty convincingly both years. We've got over under 1.5 double-digit seeds in the Sweet 16. Joe, why don't you go first?
I'm going to go over, and if I have to pick a number, I'd probably say 3.
Yep. That's exactly what I had written down too. Yep.
Yeah. Same thing. Yeah.
It's likely going to be over, but we'll see. Next one. Over under 1.5. Number 1 seeds in the Final Four. Mike, we'll go to over for Mike.
Over. Yeah, I think those top 3 teams, I think they're kind of a shoo-in for the Final Four, to be honest.
I'm going to go with a push. I think we see one number 1 seed in the Final Four. Last year, we had 0. We had number 4 seed UConn, 5 Miami, 8 or 9 Florida Atlantic, and 5 San Diego State. So I think it's going to be 1. Joe, what about you?
I think UConn's a lock for the Final Four. I've been very unapologetic about that most of the year when I've been a guest on the national cast. So I definitely think UConn, and then I think it comes down to North Carolina for me. I don't know if Houston's going to put it all together. I certainly don't think Purdue will. So I'm going to go with 2. I think North Carolina or Houston, one of them has to, you figure. So I'll go over, but barely.
All right, our third one, which is another repeat, which has been over both years. Doesn't seem likely, but we've got over 0.5, 14, 15, or 16 seeds victorious in the round of 64. Mike, why don't we go to you for this one?
Over. I really like Oakland. I think they've got a really good chance. I don't like Moorhead as much, but with that being said, I'm also a big fan of Samford. So we'll see what happens, but I'm going over.
Joe, what about you?
I think one of the Long Beach State, the beach, has to do it, or, our boy John Gross. So, you know what? Over.
I'm going to go with under. I think it would be very fitting for this year of constant chaos and nonsense and all these old players in college hoops to not give us that in the round of 64. So I'm going under.
I'll make it very clear real quick. As an Illinois guy, not a John Gross guy, but that's just me.
Okay, well,
I liked him as a Michigan fan.
Look, he's a terrific MAC coach. And I think
a great MAC coach.
He's proved that is probably his level. He's doing terrific, sort of James Franklin type level for our In a Nutshell listeners. James Franklin did terrific at Vanderbilt, but when he took the step up to Penn State,
that's disrespectful.
Or Penn State fans are catching strays when they're not even in the tournament.
Man.
Look, Micah Shrewsbury is a good coach too, and stinks that you lost him. But, we've got 0.5 teams from the first 4 getting to the round of 32. Do either of those 10 seeds win their round of 64 game?
Over.
Yeah, it's typically over, and a little bit easier to do it as a 10 seed rather than and 11 or 12, which we've seen in the past. Mike, what about you?
Oh man, what's that second one? We got Texas playing UVA, Colorado State, Boise State, Colorado. Who are they playing?
We've got Boise State, Colorado, and Virginia, and Colorado State.
Yeah,
They play Florida.
They play Florida.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to go under. I think both Florida and Texas are just better teams.
All right. Joe, this one is meant for you, but all three of us can answer it. 1.5 over-under Big Ten teams in the Sweet 16.
I was very adamant that Michigan State was going to be only one of the Sweet 16 last year. I was correct about that. And frankly, the Big Ten has been anything but encouraging this year. Even Purdue of late scared me. I'm going to go under, and if that number is 0, I don't expect that, but I wouldn't be shocked. And I know that's a hedge, but I really think only one team, and that's going to be Purdue, because there's no leaping way that they can't make the Sweet 16 this year.
Well, that's the Big Ten does stink this year, and we've kind of made that clear over the last couple months, but there was only one last year, and the Big Ten was pretty good last year. So I'm going to go with over. We said this last year. Purdue should be a shoo-in to the Sweet 16. After that, who knows what happens. Last year, obviously, the Fairleigh Dickinson Knights had other plans. But, Mike, over under 1.5 Big Ten teams in the Sweet 16.
Yeah, I'm going to go under. And no offense to my Big Ten brethren here, but the conference has vastly underperformed in the NCAA tournament the last handful of years. I think one matchup that I'm looking out for as an Illinois fan, right? Underwood has not been a good NCAA tournament coach since he's arrived in Champaign. And so I think Brigham Young is going to get the win in that one. I even think that Purdue could lose to Utah State or TCU in the round of 32. I think it could happen. I don't think it will. I think Purdue does get to the Final Four, but they could lose at any point.
So we've got one more that I've thought of, guys, and this is, I think we're all going to pick over. Do we have a Mountain West team in the Sweet 16?
Yes, you're going to have multiple.
Yes. Yeah, well, they went a couple of years without a big an NCAA tournament win from any of their teams. Obviously, San Diego State won 5 last year. We're 1 win away from hanging a banner. I would like to see the Mountain West teams do pretty well this year because they have been seriously disrespected by the committee, and we'll just have to. Hopefully, they can. The committee does typically learn, things year over year, and we'll see next year. But hopefully, they are given the respect they deserve, and that starts with getting a couple teams in the Sweet 16. So I think so too, even though none of them are protected seeds. So, guys, we have got the last segment of the show today as we near the 90-minute mark. These are not official. These are just rapid reaction picks. Final 4 picks. We're going to go to the East region first. Let's give your East region Final 4 pick. I will go first, and I'm going with the Illinois Fighting Illini.
Whoa.
What?
Whoa.
Sean, have you lost your mind?
Nope.
Wow.
Jordan Lathon and Morehead State could end that real quick, but Terrence Shannon is playing really well right now, better than probably anyone else in the country. Joe, what about you? Or Mike?
Wow. Go ahead, Joe.
I'm going to go with the very boring, unspectacular pick, and I know I picked Kansas to repeat last year early on in this show. I don't see anyone stopping UConn, Sean. I think they have a cakewalk to the Sweet 16. I think their toughest test would be Auburn. I think if your scenario played out, I don't think Illinois has the capability to hang with UConn for more than 25 minutes. So give me the Huskies going back to the Final Four.
All right, Mike, you agree with Joe, or are you going with another team?
Yeah, I'm going to agree with Joe. UConn's just probably the most complete team in college basketball right now. Look, I love Illinois. I think their sporadic offensive efficiency could bite them in the ass coming down the stretch here.
All right, we are going to go to the West region now. And Mike, since you wrapped up the last section, why don't you go first for your West region Final Four pick?
I'm usually pretty bearish on Baylor, no pun intended. But I'm going to go with the Bears to get the job done in the West. Look, I think North Carolina is super vulnerable. I think Arizona is super vulnerable, and I don't think Alabama is a very good 4 seed. So this is an opportunity to either see 5 or higher. But why not the Baylor Bears? Look, Langston Love is going to be back in the rotation. They have good some tournament experience here with Jalen Bridges. He played not so great against Iowa State this past week in the Big 12 tournament, but I think they're going to lean on his experience. And I think the Bears get the job done. I really do.
All right, Joe, who you got?
This is going to be the most shocking pick. I've been a fan of this guy forever, even when he was a young coach. I think the way he was fired from his previous job was pretty ridiculous. And he'd admit he didn't win enough games, but also the program he was at didn't hire John Wooden. And you know exactly who I'm going to say. Give me the New Mexico
Wow.
Lobos.
I thought you were going a different direction there, which was equally as crazy.
Honestly.
I thought you were going to go Nevada with Steve Alford not winning enough games at UCLA, but
Nope. Give me the New Mexico Lobos. Mike, you will hate me for this. I think their toughest game will be against Baylor. I think the combination of House and Mashburn Jr., I think that duo will not be stopped until the Final Four. Give me New Mexico. I said if Patino was going to go to the Final Four one of these next few years. Wasn't Rick. It'll be Rick Jr., Richard.
Wow,
Give me
that's a
New
hell of a
Mexico in the
pick.
Final Four.
Wow.
I'm going to go with the Arizona Wildcats, and it's because of the guy who's on the page, and that's Caleb Love. This guy's done it before in the NCAA tournament. Took an 8 seed there just a couple years ago. I think Tommy Lloyd gets over the hump, puts this "I suck in March" narrative to bed, and gets through. I think Alabama or North Carolina might get taken out early. I think another, Baylor, the Sweet 16 game could be difficult, but Arizona has been going under the radar for far too long this year since they were probably overrated in the beginning of the year. They beat Duke and Cameron, but one of the only other teams to beat Duke and Cameron is sitting up there on the top of the brackets. So we could potentially have the Caleb Love game. I don't see it. I think the Tar Heels get taken out before then.
Yeah.
So I think Caleb Love and Arizona goes to the Final Four. All right, guys, we've got our South region now. I'll be going first in this one, and I've been very, very much a fan of watching this team this year. This has been a team that is extremely fun to watch. And no, unfortunately, I'm not taking the 11 seed NC State. I'm going to be taking Reed Shepherd, Rob Dillingham, and John Calipari. Give me Kentucky into the Final Four. Joe, take it up.
Wow.
This region, frankly, is hardest to pick. Not in terms of emotion, because that'll be the next region we pick, but in terms of, I think a lot of these top 5 seeds in this region are vulnerable. I'm going to go with Houston. I think they're the safest pick. I think there's a lot of scenarios where Marquette plays really well and they get Kolek back. Like Kentucky can score like anyone. I just hate their defense so much. Yeah. Give me Houston.
All right, Mike, who you got?
My issue with Kentucky is teams that are ranked 100th in defense in college basketball don't get to the Final Four. Just doesn't happen. Houston, I think UConn's the most complete team in the country. I think Houston is the #1 team in the country right now for me. They got their bell rung against pretty much, we'll call it a road game against Iowa State in the Big 12 tournament. But Kelvin Sampson's team is going to be ready come Thursday. They're going to be ready for the tournament. I think they actually steamroll their way to a Final Four bid.
All right, we've got our last region, and that is the Midwest region, which has a bunch of options to pick from here. Mike, who you got coming out of the Midwest?
There are so many different teams that can get to the Final Four in this region. I think it's wild, but I'm going to go with the hot take and go with Purdue. The last time we saw a 16 seed top a 1 seed that wasn't Purdue losing to Fairleigh Dickinson, it was UVA against UMBC. The following year, UVA wins the national championship. So I'm not saying the same thing's going to happen here. Purdue certainly has their scar tissue in the tournament. But with that being said, I think they've never had an easier route to get to the Final Four. I think they're going to take advantage of that. I think that Utah State game or TCU is going to be really close early on, but Zach Edey's just such a dominant player. And right now, Purdue has a pair of guards that can go toe-to-toe with any guard play in the country. So give me Purdue to get to the Final Four.
All right, Joe, who you got?
This is the hardest region I've ever had to pick. I
Yeah.
don't trust any of the top 2 seeds, particularly Rick Barnes and Matt Painter in March. I
Nope.
find it impossible to trust. The coaches you do trust, Bill Self and Mark Few, have the teams with so many weaknesses. So
And the toughest first-round matchup.
absolutely, Sean, I hate doing this. I feel so non-confident. This is the least confident I've ever had picking a Final Four team. So if they do make it, I'm not going to take any credit.
Yeah, you're Creighton losing to Akron.
Give me,
Who do you have?
this pains me to say it. Give me Kansas in the Final Four.
Whoa.
Oh, no way.
Give it to me. Give it to me.
Whoa.
Give me the
No
Jayhawks.
way.
Okay. You better hope that Hunter Dickinson's shoulder's okay.
Hunter, you're a Michigan man, Michigan fellow, Michigan alum. Don't let me down.
Yeah, that
Oh,
Joe's
man.
pick could be hinging on the right shoulder of a former Michigan Wolverine. You don't. You got to lean hard into the Bill Self angle because his team is.
I'm
No.
leading all into the Bill Self angle. I can't lead into Matt Painter and Rick Barnes. I've been burned
Wow.
too many times. Sorry.
Well, I'm gonna go with another team that calls my Indiana Hoosiers rivals, and that's Purdue. I think they will exercise their demons.
2 Big Ten teams in the Final Four, Sean. That's
Yep,
insane.
yep.
That won't happen.
All right.
The last,
Well,
time, the last time the Big Ten had a team in the Final Four was 2019 with Cassius Winston. The last time they had a team in the title game was Michigan. The Big Ten stinks in March, Sean. I love the Big Ten.
Look,
I'm sorry. It's terrible.
it's gonna come to an end. Wishful thinking. Purdue gets the job done.
No.
Gets into the Final Four after exercising their demons from last year.
So are Purdue and Indiana not rivals?
No, they are, but I want to laugh in their face when they don't do it. So here they go. Purdue's going to make the Final Four. I do have them losing to Kentucky, and then I have Arizona beating Illinois, and then I have Arizona cutting down the Nets. A lot of coaches who haven't done a whole lot in March, I know, but something. You know, Shaka Smart was a coach who couldn't do something in March, and he took a team from whatever conference they were in at the time to the Final Four. Every coach is a coach that can't do it in March until they do. So I know there's a lot of those are not official. We'll get our official picks in first.
With all due respect, Sean, to our viewers out there, I would take your picks without heaping tablespoons of salt. Those are some hot takes.
Yeah, well, last year we had, a 4, a 5, a 5, and an 8 in the Final Four. So that was certainly crazier than my situation here. But last thing we're going to do here before we wrap it up is get to some chat questions, and we have quite a few. So I'll go to each one of you for each one of these questions. Our first one is Mike. Thoughts on Houston winning it all?
Yes, I do think Houston wins it all. I think they are the most dominant team in college basketball. They play elite defense, but they also have some of the best three-point shooting players in the country, i.e. Jamal Shedd and L.J. Cryer. I never thought we'd say L.J. Cryer was on a defensively dominant team, but it's 2024, so here we are. But they've also got elite forward play, so yeah, I think Houston goes toe-to-toe and can beat anybody here. They will.
All right, Joe, our second question from Colin, friend of the program. What is the biggest upset you have in the first round? We kind of already answered this, but I think you have a mascot that rhymes with, I just won't say it. You got Akron as your biggest upset in the first round.
The Zips, baby.
All right.
The
I got
John Grosses.
I got Grand Canyon. Mike, who did you have again?
I have Sanford.
Okay, yes. So Colin, obviously, Colin is a friend of the program. He's got a football podcast who just interviewed current Giant Dexter Lawrence and Brandon Jacobs. So be sure to go over there and check it out if you haven't done that already. We've got another one from Greg. NC State is winning first round. Change my mind. Why don't we go to Joe for this one? Try and change his mind.
I'm not going to. You're the hottest team in the country. They are the hottest team in the country. I can't.
Like, I don't think anybody wants to change your mind because I think a lot of people, other than the fans of who they're playing, which is
Texas Tech.
Texas Tech.
Yeah,
That
freaking scumbags in Lubbock.
well, Mike will be wearing his NC State fandom of that game for sure.
The Wolfpack.
We've got 2 more comments here. We've got Armando is overrated and Caleb Love is severely underrated. Joe, thoughts on that?
I'll address the Caleb Love thing. I don't want Armando Baycott to be an enemy of our program. I do agree with this. I think Caleb Love was one of the most criticized players in the offseason last year. I think the way he left UNC and the way he played at UNC last year left a bad taste in a huge national fan base's mouth. It pains me so much that he did not play for Michigan this year.
Could have been a Wolverine. Could have been a Michigan man.
Him and Terrence Shannon both committed.
You could be the 2 seed in that region, Joe, if you had 2 of the best 10 players.
We could have had a natty in football and basketball like Florida did in 2007, but beyond my bitterness.
Instead, you had 8 wins.
Yep. Instead, our football team won 7 more games than our basketball team.
Instead, Phil Martelli had more wins than Juwan Howard.
So bad.
Yep. Thanks, Ward Manuel. You're the worst AD in the country. Ban me for life from the stadium. I dare you. You won't. You're too lazy. But anyway, yeah, Caleb Love. I think he has potential to be. I'll put it this way: if Arizona goes to the Final Four, Caleb Love has potential to be player of the tournament to me.
Yeah, I think Love went from overrated to underrated real quick. Yeah. And I think right now he's probably underrated. He is probably the most likely player to have a crazy run to the Final Four of any, really. I mean, Zach Edey is of any guards. Connect and Edey obviously will put up numbers, but we'll be sure to update that. So that's it for everyone today. Thank you for tuning into this extra long episode of the Sports Daily College Basketball Podcast. We hope that you took our intel to help you fill out your brackets. We'll be back with a regular program before these round of 64 games, and then a ton of content as these games go final Thursday, Friday, and so on in the NCAA tournament. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and